Hello, this is Eric Miscoll, and this is the Eric Miscoll Show. I'm here in Productronica 2019, and those of you unfamiliar with the format here, we get together some interesting people, and interesting conversation always evolves. So let me introduce who we have here today. To my immediate left is the famous Dieter Weiss with Informa. Next to him, we have Rainer Kopppitz with Katek EMS. And to the far left, as always, we have Phil Stoughton with Scoop. The focus here is really going to be about the EMS and the EMS industry. And not to take away a lot of your luster, but we've spoken and you did your presentation about the numbers, so I don't know that we really need to rehash numbers. The issue really becomes what's driving those numbers. And I think that also, Rainer, that's where you could have some good input, right? As an EMS company, successful growing EMS company, you can lend some insights, and I think we all have been working in this industry. So maybe if we start there, and maybe if we start with you, Rainer, as maybe ask you, would you like to cheers first? Cheers. Cheers. Gentlemen.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yes. This is the best beer from Estonia, is our sponsor today, so no. But maybe, Rainer, as somebody who's on the front line dealing with that, maybe you can start the conversation about what's driving the growth of the EMS industry in Europe.
So right now, what we are seeing is that we have some basic trends which are driving the growth right now, which is all about, let me say, the electronification of the industry. So everything become electronics. So every, let me say, kind of dumb thing of the past, has some electronics inside now. And I mean, that's growing and growing. Some people call this IoT business. But I mean, in the heart of it is that somebody has to develop all this stuff, and somebody has to manufacture all this stuff and service all this stuff. And that's the EMS industry. And so I think that's the overlaying trend, which is, at least in our companies right now, I would say a little bit overcompensating all these talks about recession and automotive downturn, etc., etc. So if you are in the right markets, there's still a lot of growth, which is determined by the, let me say, macroeconomic trends which I just described.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you talk about some people call it the deviceification, everything becoming a device rather than an unintelligent device, so moving to smart homes, smart light bulbs, smart everything, and that creates a huge amount of opportunity for you. What I think is really interesting here in Germany is, compared to the US and compared to a lot of other regions, you have a very low percentage of outsourced electronics as well. So there's a lot of insourcing as well. And as the outsourcing grows, the opportunity to grow the total available market is still huge here, and that's different to elsewhere.
Yeah, that's totally true. But what we are seeing right now is that the trend is changing, because a lot of companies, because of the slight economic downturn, or let me say I would say the danger that the economic downturn will really come. They are thinking about, how to turn fixed cost into variable cost. They think about, how to lower the cost base, how not to invest into electronics manufacturing, but focus on their core business. So what we see right now is that we have a lot of interesting outsourcing deal opportunities on the table, and especially in Germany.
Yeah, and fortune favors the brave in these situations, and you've made some pretty bold moves over the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. What we think is that this industry in Central Europe is ready for consolidation, and that a lot of German and other Mittelstands companies and also big companies are waiting for a market consolidator to have another, let me say, new kid on the block, a big player being stable, being innovative, and being there for the next 20 years.
And to the numbers, though, too, we were talking about the total available market served and what have you. And Dieter, I remember from your numbers, you had it sized, I believe, at about 70-30. Is that about right? That about 70% of the electronics manufacturing is still being done in-house at these OEMs, versus so about 30% out, which does speak to opportunity.
Oh yes, definitely. We only have in Germany, which is still the biggest single European market, only 30% EMS. So there is a lot of opportunity, and this is a reason why a lot of companies are expanding into Germany, especially in regards to mergers and acquisitions. We have seen this this year as well from Scanfil, who bought Hasek in Thuringia. We have seen it from Hansa Matrix, who have bought Ritter Electronic in Remscheid. And there is a lot of such movements going on because people realize that it is insufficient to just have an engineering office. Some global companies have engineering offices in Germany and production in Romania. It's insufficient. People expect as well at least a short or a small supply of short lead time products and prototypes over here in Germany. And the prototype business is very important.
And if I may, the interesting thing as I look at the market here too is that the consolidation isn't, I'm going to use you as an example, Rainer, isn't happening in kind of the way it happened in the United States with a lot of companies, which was they acquired other ones and they became just a bigger entity. You take great pride in maybe you're consolidating some centralized functioning, but you're wanting to allow for the core competence of, as you call them, your speedboats, right? In order to allow them to be a part of a bigger ship, but still to be nimble and respond in the market as appropriate, right?
Absolutely. I think the customers are not looking for new big players with 7 levels of hierarchy. They are looking for really, let me say, speedy players, which are close to the customers, close to the markets, with fast decision time, with fast decision and reaction circles. They don't want this, let me say, conglomerates of big traditional companies. So what we try to do is to add, some really, speedy companies, and then, add some very basic central functions, but that's 5 to 6 people for the entire empire, and all the rest, is be done in the speedboat, so that they can stay as flexible, as fast as they are today, and what the customers are expecting. But then, with those very, very few central functions, we of course, want to get all the advantages from, let me say, what we call synergies in terms of sourcing, in terms of professional sales approach, in terms of operational approach. And I think that's the way forward.
Yeah, and I think what you talk about there with your speedboats is agility, and agility is a key word in the industry at the moment. We need agility to respond to political issues, to supply chain challenges, all kinds of other things. What I'm curious about is how do you manage to maintain that agility and that kind of almost entrepreneurial approach within an organization as you grow, because you need to make sure you have people in place to do that.
If I can leverage off that too, because the issue also is what is it, when one thinks German, one thinks very disciplined and structured and, all of that great that makes German manufacturing so excellent. So is German agility the same as what maybe a U.S. customer considers agile, or is it slower? I don't know the answer. I'm just curious, kind of.
I think the basic thing is that it's all about the team. So one of the main criteria when we are looking at a potential acquisition target is the team. And if we see a management team which we don't think that could be part of the Katek team, but just looking into the own kingdom and optimizing the kingdom and the own P&L, could be the best manager of the world, but there's no fit then to the Katek group. And that's I think, and the same is with the central persons. You need to have the right team with the right spirit to bring Katek forward, but understanding that one company alone will not win, because it will just be a mediocre small company. But to take advantage of all the, let me say, synergies, we need to act as a team, and that's working pretty well right now. But of course there will be some members then of the team which it will turn out over time that they are not the right ones, and then they will be shaken out.
Yeah, and it's a question of being able to use that and then being able to leverage the scale. Dieter, you have looked at numerous companies across Europe and the different regions. Do you see big cultural differences, and do you look at company cultures and think this culture's right for now and this culture's right for the past?
Definitely. we have to realize that we are over here in Europe and not in the United States. And I once had an American boss who told me, well, Europe, that is the Europe of the United States, of Europe. And I said, you're totally mistaken. We are 42 different countries. We have so many different languages. We have so many different currencies. We have so many different cultural histories. You cannot compare Europe to the United States. And every company from the United States coming over to Europe and trying to solve European problems with American solutions will fail. And we have seen that with Walmart in the past. Even such a big company, they failed in Europe because they didn't understand European culture. By the way, I do think as well that the same applies to the opposite way. A European company trying to make business in the United States and trying to solve the problems over there with European thinking will fail. Yeah? So you have to be very careful checking when you look at potential acquisitions of companies, do these cultures fit? Yeah? And that is, I can assure you, that is much more difficult than doing the same in the United States.
Yeah, and they've got to be complementary cultures. Just for the record, I think tomorrow's headline of Weiss takes on Walmart is going to get a lot of reads.
You know, it's interesting, and to your point, well, 2 points. One, I appreciate what you were talking about with the culture, and it also sounds like in the M&A strategy, in the horse racing, they sometimes say you're betting the jockey, not the horse, right? And it's clear that you're kind of, what you're looking for is that the jockey, the horse may generally 4 legs, it can run, okay, it meets that now, who's riding it, and that's who I'm betting on, right? And how that goes. So, but as you were talking about the culture piece, I remember trying to explain to the CEO of Elkatech 15 years ago in Texas, he was trying to figure out how to improve the business in the United States, and they're Finnish, of course, which are German on steroids, right? The way they're disciplined. And I said, well, you know, in the United States, we have what's called tweak it as you go, right? You kind of keep moving, right? And he said, we're not so good at that, you know? And it isn't. And that really was a culture and a business mindset difference that was hard for them to overcome over there. They just knew how to act in a certain way, and you need to adjust to the local markets that way.
That's really interesting, Eric, because I had a similar experience in China. I was in China filming at a factory. I think it was a Siemens factory, and one of the staff there had worked for Intel and had worked for Siemens. And he said, at Intel, we do exactly what you said, tweak it as you go. We would make a product, it didn't work. We'd make another product, it worked a bit better, but it didn't work. And then third or fourth iteration, we had a product that really worked. He said, I've come over to Siemens, we write a plan, we develop an idea. The product we make works first time, but it takes us a lot longer to get there. And I think when I look at US companies arriving in the US, there is that clash of cultures, which is challenging in terms of the market understanding that. Do you think Germany is able to loosen up a bit and deal with that global culture?
Honestly speaking, I think so. I think so because I mean it's kind of behind China is the country exporting the most. So they wouldn't be so successful in exporting so much where they're not able to deal with all those different cultures. Honestly speaking, I think that Germany and maybe the UK are and maybe the Netherlands are the countries with the, let me say, best ability to adapt to other cultures.
Yeah, and I think the Dutch particularly are a nation of traders that are just used to adapting and dealing with whoever's put in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, absolutely. So talking with the outsourcing, I often think as these OEMs outsource, they start losing the tribal knowledge, and the culture of manufacturing internally. So is that, and you don't see, although years ago there was some forecasting of OEMs bringing manufacturing back in-house. I don't see that evolving, and I think you become dependent, and which is great for business, right? For stickiness with them. I don't see that going back in. Would you agree? How do you see?
No. I think the same. Though it's not this kind of insourcing. It's not really happening. There are some examples always, of course, because somebody's changing the strategy or seeing that the own added value is becoming too small, and so they want to get the electronics back. But it's really I would say it's really exceptions. It's not the main trend is really thinking about outsourcing and investing into the key capabilities and turning fixed costs into variable costs. And honestly speaking, that's the way forward.
Yeah, well, manufacturing's hard. If I was an OEM, I wouldn't want to do my own manufacturing. I wouldn't want to make that kind of investment. And I'd want to buy from someone that I can switch on and switch off. And
I mean, one of the problems, we are just talking about with one large company about an outsourcing of their electronics division, and I mean, it all starts with that this company is very openly saying we don't even know what the right price niveau is, the right pricing for our electronics products, for our electronic components, because they don't know it. And if we get a tender into the market, nobody takes it for serious because everybody knows it's just a benchmark. So they don't have any clue what the real value or cost should be of those electronic components. So it starts with those kind of simple things why outsourcing makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Dieter, what do you think on all this?
Yeah, well, if you look at today's OEM manufacturing, they have been fine-tuning the operations to reduce cost as much as possible, which means as well that they are focusing on 100% capacity utilization. Now we see this trend, and on purpose not call it a recession. We have no recession over here, and definitely we have no recession in the EMS industry. But we see a decline in the production of certain industrial goods because due to all this discussion in the market about the market to decline, purchasers are very cautious in placing orders, and at least they reduce the orders. Now, if an OEM all of a sudden is faced with the fact that his customer tells him, well, from tomorrow on you get only 90% of the orders, then he has 10% of idle capacity. And these OEMs are professionals. They have fine-tuned their production to be 100% and to be 100% cost-effective. Now, all of a sudden, with the lower utilization of capacity, they have the problem that the cost per unit is rising, and they cannot afford this. And on the other hand, it's a good time. There is a lot of debt corps in every big company lying in the basement. And as the river is flowing high, everybody is saying now, let's get these corps out, let's depreciate certain things and throw them out into the river. And that is what is happening. I get calls from big OEMs who tell me, well, listen, we have a problem, we have insufficient capacity utilization, we need to shut down a factory, but we need an EMS company to do the job for us. And preferably, we would like to have an EMS company like who has a certain, like Katek, but who has capacity in Eastern Europe, who has preferably as well capacity in China and has capacity in Middle America. Whereas the capacity in China, I see more and more less of the importance due to certain politics of certain people very far in the West, but other than that, we see this trend that there will be more outsourcing of products. And so at this moment of time, the industry talking about lower capacity utilization, about lower order intake, about lower revenues, it's the best time for the EMS industry to be at the doorsteps of the OEMs, knock at the door and say, here I am, I can take over this business from you and I can do it better because I have other customers on top where I can utilize my capacity much better.
And absolutely. What I'm curious about, Dieter, because if we roll this back a decade or two, all those companies wanted guys like Rainer to buy their factory and take over all their staff. Is that happening again, or do people not? Are they not thinking?
Are they divesting the facility too? Do you have to take that?
Yes, but it's not only you have to take it, we also want to take it. I mean, normally you don't pay a lot of money for it. It's just kind of symbolic pricing. It's not really buying a company. It's more taking over the responsibility. And, so the discussions with those companies are not predominantly about the price tag you are paying. It's more about the reliability of your, to deliver the right things. It's about quality. It's about, because they have really risk. For example, if you are in the automotive industry and you deliver your devices to, let me say, Audi, Volkswagen, etc., and then you outsource your electronics, then this is your single source. You're 100% dependent, and if this EMS company is failing, your company gets bought. So that's the discussion. It's stability, it's reliability. Of course, it's a little bit wrapped around savings. Yeah. But it's not the price of the company.
No, it's you able to do it well. Exactly. And you able to do it.
Yeah. I would say looking at history on this is important too, because I remember back, and I still have it because I'm a research junkie this way. It was a report done about the EMS industry years ago, and it was about and it was within the previous, I forget how many quarters, the large tier EMS had written off more than the profit they had made from those OEM acquisitions over that period of time, right? So there was definitely risk there. And the reports, the highlight that he said effectively the EMS was complicit in writing off these assets for the OEM. The OEM came out in a much better situation, but then the EMS did. So hopefully what's going on here is different, having learned from that.
That's completely different, and I mean in those situations only a fool would pay. It's a little bit like the IT outsourcing deals of the 80s and 90s. Yeah. Only a fool would pay a lot of money to acquire an outsourcing deal. That doesn't make sense, because then you have to write it off over the next years, and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and Dieter, when you look at history, how many EMS companies are there in Europe that are management buyouts of failed factories by global players that acquired them from OEMs? Old Nokia or Ericsson factories that were bought by major players that are now smaller EMS companies as single facilities.
The EMS industry in Europe is on a constant move. We have today more than 2,000 EMS companies belonging to about 1,775 companies, counting all legal entities separately. Now, we have seen many moves in regards to management buyouts of OEM companies by the management and becoming an EMS. If we are talking about big ones, and if the former OEMs were willing to make concessions, then it worked out, and those companies today are big companies. But still, there is a lot of wishful thinking in regards to what assets are still worth. In my opinion, if an OEM decides to quit manufacturing in full and transfer the business to an EMS, yes, he can give the equipment to the EMS, but he still needs to write it off himself. Everything else will not lead to a reliable EMS, because at the end of the day, we're not just talking about design for manufacturing, design for testing. We talk about design for profits. Yeah? An EMS company needs to make profits the same way an OEM needs to make profits. And if management of OEM is not smart enough to realize that, they are building a supplier which has no chance to survive, and at the end of the day that might risk the business of the OEM as well.
That's all about building that relationship, and I don't know how many times we've heard the partnership discussion, and at the end of the day there's got to be some quid pro quo, so some profit filters down to companies like yourself, so you can invest in digital transformation, that agility that makes you a better vendor for your customer.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and this brings me to, I think, one of the biggest deficits of our industry, because everybody is thinking about metal, about machines, etc. So if you discuss with managing directors of EMS companies, I mean, for them it's absolutely easy to say, hey, look, I need to invest another 1.5 million in new machines and testing equipment, etc. The same people are extremely reluctant to invest, let me say, 100,000 people in, you know, two really good people, two good employees. So everything is wrapped about, you know, machinery, Apple, you know, capex, etc. But I mean, the human factor, the investment into skills, the investment into customer relationship people, etc. That's absolutely undervalued and underestimated in this industry.
Yeah, and it's an essential part of the business development,
Absolutely.
isn't it? Yeah. We need to wrap up soon, but I want to just briefly mention that I met Dieter in the corridor before he came to the studio on the first day, and he didn't recognize me. So for Dieter, hey, now it makes sense.
Where have you been?
Yeah.
Well played, well played. Gentlemen, Prost.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you all. Phil, thank you.